Hello and welcome to section 4 of Unit 1 of International Procurement. Today we'll be discussing barriers and challenges to international sourcing. By the end of this section, you should be able to identify barriers to international sourcing, arguments for barriers to international sourcing, and arguments against barriers to international sourcing. So, as you already know, there are some barriers that may come with working or going international or sourcing international. As there are some benefits, there are some barriers to it. For example, some of these one main barrier we already know is language barrier. So suppliers may not be fluent in the home language of the buying organization and vice versa. Again, the quality expectation. So sometimes you may think that okay, I'm buying from China and it should be the best of quality, but then the quality expectations may not be met as compared to other overseas countries. Again, we look at compliance issues. So supplier failure to comply with social responsibility, quality, environmental and safety standards can be detrimental to your company's relationship with customers. So for example, um, the some European firms may want to buy cocoa from us, but then they expect us to comply with certain sustainable or certain environmental issues as compared as in regard to how we keep our cocoa safety and safety standards or health issues, while how we may not include child labor in the cocoa production or in the cocoa planting and all that. So some of these compliance issues comes in as a barrier as well in going international. So just as we are taking the international as Ghanaian or the Ghanaian firm going across borders, let's also consider that the overseas firm also coming to Ghana is also sourcing internationally. So you take it from the both sides of the coin. Again, we come to production scheduling. So when an order is late, suppliers may have to pay a penalty to your customer or ship by air instead of by ocean. So these are also some barriers to international sourcing. So sometimes if orders delay, it is either you may want to pay a penalty and go the normal way, or you may choose a more reliable and faster but cost intensive um, alternative to send in the good work to send in the good or the products. Then we come to logistics. So things can do go wrong between times. Between the time a shipment leaves a factory and when it arrives at its destination. So logistics is also a very important barrier or a very important factor as a barrier to international sourcing. In that sometimes when the logistics or when there's no transportation, effective transportation between the shipments of a product from one destination to the other, it can also cause a very huge um, problems for the buying organization, and that's also a barrier. And then managing the supply chain. So the supply chain in itself is a very complex thing to manage. So managing the entire supply chain with its challenges, over reliance on key suppliers can also result in problems if even one of them goes wrong. So if an actor of the supply chain, just as it is in a chain, if there is a break in one one element or one actor, it breaks the entire chain. So that's also another form of barrier to international sourcing. Then we come to cash flow payment issues, which also crop up since payments usually take longer with overseas suppliers. And that's also true. Payment has always been a barrier and a problem to procurement. So be it international, wherever payment is an international payment is a barrier to um, international sourcing or international procurement. Then we come to some arguments for international sourcing. So that is to say that why would you want to go international? So some advantages for international sourcing or arguments for international sourcing. So there's an economic wide trade um, which creates job in industries that have comparative advantage and destroys jobs in industries that have comparative disadvantages, and that is true. So, for example, I mean, some um, industries may enjoy a comparative advantage, and by they enjoying, it will also destroy some industries having these competitive advantages. So, if the international sourcing bit goes in two directions, as some are enjoying, some are also at the receiving end of disadvantage points. And again, there is no denying that with international trade there will be short run hardship for some, but economists maintain the whole economy's living standards is raised by such exchange. So basically, the international procurement, international sourcing um, bit or a globalization bit ignores the fact that even though some people may be enjoying, as I mentioned earlier, there's also the need that other people are in hardship, or that there are short run hardships. There are short run hardship for others, but an economist will always maintain that the economist's standard of living is the best, or is raised. So we look at some arguments against barriers to international sourcing. So economists generally agree that trade barriers are detrimental and decrease overall economic efficiency. This can be explained by the theory of comparative advantage. So we are seeing that just as other people are having the advantage is to the critical few, and then the trivial many are suffering when it comes to globalization and international markets. So most trade barriers work on the same principle: the imposition of some sort of cost or trade that raises the price of the trade products. So the main principle that these trade barriers work on is that there's some form of imposition on some sort of cost on trade that raises the price of trade products. So we put some imposition on some products, and then in the end you may have to pay more for that, because before you get such products into your country, I mean, there are a lot of price impositions on these products. Again, trade barriers are often criticized for the effects they have on the developing world. And that is true. I mean, the developing world are at the receiving end, while the developed worlds enjoy from these trade barriers, because they will just put, as I mentioned earlier in the earlier point, so that they will just put some impositions on specific products, and before you get some of these products into your economy, or into your land or your country, you may be paying a whole lot, which affects the developing world. Let's look at the next point. It says trade barriers such as taxes on food imports or subsidies for farmers in developed economies lead to overproduction and dumping on world markets, that's lowering prices and hurting poor country farmers. So when you look at this point, they are even saying that for the people who are less privileged, the poor farmers that produces these things, there are also some form of taxes on food imports, on or there are some form of taxes of food imports on their subsidies for these farmers in developed economies. So they just then have to overproduce and keep them, or there's also dumping on the world market, because there are a lot of taxes on their food, and they can't even make sales, I mean, freely, and hence it affects the poor country farmer in various developed economies. So in this section we looked at um, identifying barriers to international sourcing. Again, we also looked at arguments for barriers for international sourcing, and then arguments against the barriers for international sourcing. Thank you.